Crack! The sound of my package hitting my front door echoed through the whole house like a gunshot. Through the kitchen window, I watched that jackass of a delivery driver wipe his hands on his pants like he'd just taken out the trash. Third time this month he'd hurled my packages like he was throwing a goddamn football, and this time I wasn't going to just shake my head and let it slide like some beaten-down old man who'd lost his fight. Because at 73 years old, after what I'd been through, after what I'd built with these two hands, I still had plenty of fight left in me. "Hey, you there!" I called out, stepping onto my front porch. The kid, couldn't have been more than 25, turned around, and I could see the annoyance written all over his face, like I was inconveniencing him by existing. "What?" he snapped, not even bothering to hide his irritation. "You just threw my package at my door. Third time this month. What's your name?" He looked me up and down, taking in my gray hair, my old jeans, my worn-out Cardinals t-shirt, and I could practically see the wheels turning in his head. Just another old codger complaining about nothing, just another relic who didn't understand how the modern world worked. "Look, Gramps," he said, and right there, with that word, he crossed a line he didn't even know existed. "I got 200 stops today. I don't got time to ring doorbells and wait around for every old-timer who moves slower than molasses. Package got delivered, didn't it? What more you want?" I felt that familiar heat rising in my chest. The same heat I'd felt in the jungles of Vietnam when some know-it-all lieutenant fresh out of West Point would try to tell me how to do my job. The same heat I'd felt in those sterile Pentagon conference rooms when some suit who'd never spent a day in the field would question my engineering decisions. But I kept my voice level, kept my composure. 60 years of military training doesn't just disappear because you hang up the uniform. "I want you to treat my property with respect," I said calmly. "And I want your name." He laughed, actually laughed. "My name? You gonna call my boss and complain? Good luck with that, old man. They don't give a shit about complaints from someone who probably doesn't even know how to use a computer. Now, if you'll excuse me, I got real work to do." He turned to walk away, and that's when I said the words that should have been his first warning. "That GPS system you're using to find all those addresses? I helped build that." He stopped, turned back around, and that smirk on his face got even wider. "Yeah, right. And I'm Steve Jobs. You probably still got a rotary phone in there, don't you, Gramps?" That's when he made his second mistake. He walked back toward me, close enough that I could smell the energy drink on his breath and see the contempt in his eyes. Close enough that he thought he could intimidate me. "Let me explain something to you, old-timer," he said, jabbing his finger toward my chest but smart enough not to actually touch me. "This ain't 1950. Nobody cares about your war stories or whatever bullshit you think you did back in the day. The world moved on without you. So why don't you go back inside, turn on your stories, and let the rest of us who actually matter get on with our lives?" I stood there for a moment, looking at this kid who thought he knew everything about everything, and I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Because he had no idea what storm he'd just called down on himself. No idea that the old-timer he was talking to had spent 47 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, rising from an enlisted man who could barely afford shoes to a full-bird colonel who'd helped design and implement some of the most important technological advances in modern military history. See, I'm Robert Mitchell, and that smart-ass kid just made the biggest mistake of his young life. "What's the name on your van?" I asked quietly. "What? Your company. What's the name?" He squinted at me suspiciously. "Speed Logistics." "Why?" "Just curious how they route their drivers. Pretty impressive system, GPS. Satellites talking to receivers, calculating positions within 3 feet anywhere on Earth. Real marvel of engineering. Whatever, nut job. I'm out of here. And with that, he climbed back into his van, license plate number KHT8847, which I memorized automatically, old habits die hard, and drove off, leaving me standing in my doorway with my beaten-up package and a head full of memories that this kid couldn't even begin to fathom. I picked up the package, some replacement parts for my workshop, and examined the damage. Corner was crushed, probably from where it hit the door. But that wasn't what bothered me. What bothered me was the disrespect, the casual dismissal, the assumption that because I was old, I was worthless. The assumption that because I wasn't wearing a 3-piece suit or driving a fancy car, I hadn't contributed anything meaningful to this world. If this kid only knew. If he only knew that the very technology that made his job possible, that told him exactly where to go and how to get there, had been born in rooms where I'd spent sleepless nights working through problems that would have made his head spin. If he only knew that the satellites orbiting overhead, the ones that made sure he never got lost, were there because of work I'd done before he was even born. But he didn't know, and that was about to become his problem. I went back inside and sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd done homework with my kids 30 years ago, the same table where I'd worked on classified projects that I still couldn't talk about in detail. I opened my laptop. Yeah, that's right, kid. This old-timer knows how to use a computer, and started doing some research. Speed Logistics, founded in 2019, headquarters in Dallas, Texas, regional hub here in St. Louis. CEO named Marcus Webb, former Marine, which I noted with interest. Company prided itself on fast, efficient delivery using cutting-edge GPS technology and optimized routing algorithms. Their website was full of buzzwords about innovation and customer service, with testimonials from happy customers praising their reliable professional drivers. Professional. Right. I dug deeper. The company used a fleet management system called Fleet Track Pro, which integrated with standard GPS receivers to provide real-time tracking and route optimization. Pretty standard stuff, built on the foundation that guys like me had laid down decades ago. The foundation this kid thought was just ancient history. I spent the next hour documenting everything I could remember about my 3 encounters with this driver. The first time, he tossed a package containing my prescription medications onto my front steps from about 10 feet away. I'd watched through my living room window as the box bounced twice before coming to rest against my flower pot. The second time, he'd thrown a box marked Fragile that contained a birthday gift for my granddaughter, a delicate glass ornament from Ireland that my late wife had ordered online just before she passed. That box had landed corner first on my concrete steps, and I'd heard something rattle when I picked it up. This third time was just the final straw. Each incident, I noted the time, the date, the approximate trajectory of the thrown package, and yes, I estimated the velocity too. Old habits from my engineering days. When you spend your career calculating ballistic trajectories and satellite orbits, you start seeing physics everywhere. The first throw, approximately 15 feet, release angle of roughly 30 degrees, estimated velocity 12 feet per second. The second, 12 feet, 45-degree angle, maybe 10 feet per second. Today's throw, 8 feet, nearly horizontal trajectory, probably 14 feet per second. But more than that, I started thinking about the bigger picture, about respect, about service, about what it means to do a job with pride instead of just going through the motions because you think nobody's watching or nobody cares. This kid represented everything that was wrong with today's world. the casual disrespect for elders, the assumption that technology just appeared out of nowhere, that there weren't real people with real expertise who'd spent their lives building the foundations that made modern life possible. The idea that if you didn't fit into someone's narrow definition of relevant, you could just be dismissed and ignored. Well, I was about to teach him and his company a lesson about assumptions. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. It rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Peterson." "Bill, it's Robert Mitchell." There was a pause. "Bob? Jesus Christ, how long has it been? 5 years? 6? Something like that. Listen, I need a favor." Bill Peterson had been my project manager back in the early GPS days, when we were still figuring out how to make the whole system work reliably. We'd spent countless nights in secure facilities, debugging software, testing hardware, arguing over specifications that would determine whether our satellites would function for 5 years or 50. He'd retired from the Army the same year I did, but had gone into the private sector, eventually ending up as a senior technical consultant for the GPS Directorate at the Air Force Space Command. If anyone could help me make my point, it was Bill. "What kind of favor?" he asked, and I could hear the curiosity in his voice. "I need to remind a young man about the importance of respecting his elders. And I think it's time some people learned exactly who built the technology they take for granted every single day." I explained the situation in detail, the 3 package throwing incidents, the kid's attitude, his dismissive comments about my generation being irrelevant. Bill started chuckling about halfway through my story. "You know what, Bob? I think you're absolutely right. This sounds like a teachable moment. Let me make some calls." "What kind of calls?" "Well, for starters, Speed Logistics has a contract with the Department of Defense for deliveries to military installations. Guess who has oversight on technology compliance for those contracts?" I grinned. "I'm listening." "My office. And we've been planning a comprehensive audit of all civilian GPS-dependent contractors anyway. Time to ensure they're properly trained on the historical significance and current applications of GPS technology. Might be a good time to move that up on the schedule." After I hung up with Bill, I made another call. This one to my old commanding officer, General Patricia Hawkins, who'd retired 2 years ago but still maintained connections throughout the military and defense contracting community. Patricia had been the one who'd recommended me for the GPS project back in 1977, when it was still just a crazy idea about putting atomic clocks in space. "Patricia, it's Bob Mitchell." "Bob, how are you? How's retirement treating you?" "Well, let's just say I've got an interesting situation that might benefit from your expertise in personnel management." I told her the story, and she reacted exactly as I'd hoped she would. "You know what, Bob? I think it's time we reminded some people about the contributions our generation made to their comfortable little world." Then another call to my former colleague at MIT, Dr. James Chen, who'd helped develop some of the key algorithms that made GPS navigation possible. James had always been the theoretical genius to my practical engineering approach. While I was figuring out how to make satellites talk to receivers, he was working out the mathematical foundations that made precise positioning calculations possible. "James, I've got a story for you. Knowing you, Bob, this should be good." After I explained what had happened, James was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know, I've been invited to speak at several technology conferences lately. Industry folks seem very interested in understanding the historical development of positioning systems. I wonder if there might be some local companies that could benefit from that kind of educational presentation." Then one more call to Sarah Williams, who'd been my chief engineer on 3 different satellite projects and now worked for the Federal Aviation Administration. Sarah was the best systems integrator I'd ever worked with, the kind of engineer who could see how all the pieces fit together when the rest of us were still arguing about individual components. "Sarah, how's life at the FAA?" "Busy as always. We're implementing new GPS-based navigation standards for commercial aviation, trying to educate the industry about proper use of positioning technology." Funny you should mention education. Each conversation was the same. I explained what had happened, and each person reacted with the same mixture of amusement and outrage. Amusement at the irony of a delivery driver disrespecting one of the guys who'd made delivery driving possible in the first place. Outrage at the casual dismissal of someone who'd served his country for 5 decades. The next morning came gray and drizzly, typical October weather in Missouri. I was up at 0500, same as always, drinking my coffee and reading the newspaper, the actual paper version, thank you very much, when I heard the familiar rumble of the Speed Logistics van pulling up outside. Through my kitchen window, I watched the same kid, still didn't know his name, grab a package from the back and start walking toward my house. But this time was different. This time, he walked all the way to the door, set the package down gently, rang the doorbell, took a step back, and waited. I opened the door, and he was standing there with a forced smile on his face, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. "Good morning, sir," he said, and I could tell every word was painful for him. "I have a delivery for Robert Mitchell." "That's me." "Great. If you could just sign here." He held out his electronic tablet, the same kind that used GPS coordinates to verify delivery locations. The irony wasn't lost on me. I took the tablet and stylus, but instead of signing right away, I looked at him carefully. "You seem different today, more professional." He shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot. "Yeah, well, I had a talk with my supervisor yesterday about, customer service and stuff." "Is that right? What brought that on?" "Someone complained about me, said I wasn't being respectful to customers, especially older customers." He said it like the words tasted bad in his mouth. I signed the tablet and handed it back to him. "Well, that's good to hear. Respect is important." "Yeah, right. Well, have a good day, sir." He turned to go, and I called after him. "Young man, what's your name? I like to know who my delivery driver is." He stopped, sighed, turned back around. "It's Derek." "Derek Martinez." "Well, Derek Martinez, thank you for the improved service. I do appreciate it." He nodded awkwardly and walked back to his van. But I could see it in his body language, in the way he carried himself, in the set of his shoulders. This wasn't genuine change. This was compliance. He was going through the motions because someone had told him to, not because he understood why it mattered. The disrespect was still there, just buried under a thin veneer of forced politeness. That was going to change. That afternoon, my phone rang. Bill Peterson. "Bob, you're not going to believe this. I made some calls yesterday like I promised. Turns out Speed Logistics has a more extensive contract with the Department of Defense than I initially thought. They handle deliveries to military installations across 3 states, including some sensitive facilities." Interesting. It gets better. Guess who has oversight on technology compliance for those contracts? Do tell, my office. And guess what we're launching next week? A comprehensive audit of all civilian GPS-dependent contractors to ensure they're properly trained on the historical significance and current applications of GPS technology. I started laughing. "Bill, you magnificent bastard." "Wait, It gets even better. I talked to Patricia, General Hawkins, and she's organizing a little educational seminar for speed logistics management. GPS technology, past, present, and future. Mandatory attendance for all regional managers and supervisors. Guess who's been invited to speak about the historical development of the system? You're kidding. I am not. It's scheduled for next Friday at their regional headquarters. And Bob? Patricia specifically requested that they invite some of their senior drivers to attend as well. You know, for educational purposes. This was getting better by the minute, but I wasn't done yet. That evening I sat down and wrote a letter. Not an email, a real letter, on real paper, with a real stamp. Old school. I wrote it to Marcus Webb, the CEO of Speed Logistics, and I laid out everything. The disrespectful treatment, the casual dismissal, the irony of a GPS-dependent company employing someone who showed no appreciation for the technology that made his job possible. But more than that, I wrote about service, about respect, about the idea that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of their age or appearance, about the fact that you never know who you're dealing with or what they might have contributed to the world. I told him about my 47 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, about the nights I'd spent in windowless Pentagon rooms, working through calculations that would determine whether GPS satellites would stay in orbit or drift into space junk, about the field tests in the Nevada desert, where we'd proven that the system could work under combat conditions, about the briefings I'd given to Joint Chiefs of Staff, explaining how this new technology would revolutionize not just military operations, but civilian life as well. I told him about the specific projects I'd worked on. The Timation program in the early 70s, where we'd first proven that atomic clocks could maintain accuracy in the harsh environment of space. The Transit Satellite Navigation System that had been the predecessor to GPS. The countless hours spent debugging software, testing hardware, refining algorithms, solving problems that had never been solved before. I told him about the patents I held, 17 of them, covering everything from satellite communication protocols to receiver synchronization methods. About the papers I'd published in technical journals, papers that were still being cited by researchers working on positioning technology today. About the awards I'd received, the Legion of Merit, the Meritorious Service Medal, the Army Commendation Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters. Not to brag, but to make a point. To show him that the old-timer his driver had dismissed so casually had spent his entire adult life building the foundation that modern logistics companies depended on. And then I told him what I expected. Not an apology, though that would be nice. Not compensation, though I wouldn't turn it down. I wanted education. I wanted his drivers to understand what they were using every single day. I wanted them to appreciate the decades of work, the billions of dollars in investment, the countless hours of testing and refinement that had gone into creating the technology that made their jobs possible. I wanted them to understand that the little device in their van that told them exactly where to go and how to get there wasn't just some piece of electronic equipment that had always existed. It was the culmination of decades of work by thousands of people, many of whom had sacrificed time with their families, missed important personal milestones, and dedicated their lives to solving problems that most people couldn't even comprehend. I mailed the letter on Tuesday. On Wednesday, my phone rang. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Marcus Webb, CEO of Speed Logistics. I received your letter." His voice was tight, controlled, like a man who was trying very hard not to lose his temper. "I have to say, sir, that some of your claims seem rather extraordinary." Which claims would those be, Mr. Webb? Well, for starters, your assertion that you helped develop GPS technology. I mean, no disrespect, sir, but GPS was developed by the military decades ago. It would have taken hundreds of engineers, scientists, contractors, the kind of resources and expertise that only major corporations and government agencies could provide. You're absolutely right, I said. It did take hundreds of people, thousands actually, if you count all the supporting personnel. I was one of them. There was a long pause. Could you prove that? Mr. Webb, have you ever heard of the Navstar GPS Joint Program Office? Well, yes, of course. That's the original GPS program. I was Chief of Satellite Systems Engineering for that program from 1978 to 1985. Before that, I worked on the predecessor programs, Transit and Tomation. After that, I led the team that developed the first military GPS receivers that could operate in combat environments. I have the security clearances, the service records, and the commendations to prove every word of it. Another long pause. I see. Mr. Webb, did you serve? Yes, sir. Marines, 2 tours in Iraq. Then you understand the importance of respecting those who came before you. You understand that the technology you use to navigate in country, to call in airstrikes, to coordinate with other units, that didn't just appear out of nowhere. Real people built that. Real people like me. Yes, sir. I understand that. Your driver, Derek Martinez, told me that the world had moved on without me, that nobody cared about my war stories or whatever bullshit I thought I'd done back in the day. He told me to go back inside and turn on my stories while the people who actually matter got on with their lives. I could hear Webb sucking in air through his teeth. Mr. Mitchell, I am so sorry. That is absolutely unacceptable behavior, and I assure you, Mr. Webb, I don't need assurances. I need action. Your company depends entirely on GPS technology. Your drivers use it hundreds of times a day. Your customers track their packages using it. Your route optimization software is built on it. Your entire business model relies on the precise positioning and navigation capabilities that GPS provides. Everything you do, everything your company is, exists because of work that people like me did 50 years ago. Yes, sir, you're absolutely right. So here's what's going to happen. Next Friday, your regional management team is going to attend a mandatory seminar on GPS technology hosted by the Air Force Space Command. I'm going to be one of the speakers, and I want Derek Martinez there too. That can certainly be arranged? Good. Because it's time some people learned that respect isn't just a nice idea, it's a requirement, and it goes both ways. We talked for another 15 minutes. Webb told me about his military background, his tours in Iraq, his decision to start a logistics company when he got out of the Marines. I could hear in his voice that he was genuinely embarrassed by his driver's behavior, that he understood the implications of what had happened. Mr. Mitchell, can I ask you something? Sure. Why didn't you just file a complaint and get Derek fired? I mean, based on what you've told me, that would have been completely justified. I thought about that for a moment. Mr. Webb, punishment might have satisfied my anger, but it wouldn't have changed anything. Derek would have been fired. Some other young person would have taken his place, and the cycle would have continued. I'd rather try to educate him, help him understand why respect matters. That's very generous of you, sir. It's not generosity, Mr. Webb. It's practicality. Derek's not a bad kid. He's just ignorant, and ignorance can be fixed with education. The next few days passed quietly. Derek continued delivering my packages, and his behavior remained professionally correct but clearly forced. He'd ring the doorbell, wait for me to answer, hand me the package politely, get my signature, and leave. No small talk, no warmth, but no disrespect either. Progress, I supposed, but not the kind of genuine understanding I was hoping for. I used those days to prepare for Friday's presentation. I dug through my old files, pulled out photos from the early GPS days, assembled documentation of my involvement in the program. I had copies of patent applications, technical reports, performance evaluations, commendation letters, enough evidence to convince even the most skeptical observer that I'd been exactly where I claimed to be, doing exactly what I claimed to have done. But more than that, I thought about what I wanted to say. How do you explain 50 years of technological development to people who've never thought about where their tools come from? How do you make someone understand the difference between using technology and creating it? How do you bridge the gap between generations that seem to have lost the ability to communicate with each other? Friday morning came crisp and clear, one of those perfect October days that make you glad to be alive. I put on my best suit, navy blue wool, the one I'd worn to Pentagon briefings back in the day, and drove to the Speed Logistics Regional Headquarters. It was a modern building in an industrial park, all glass and steel and efficiency. The parking lot was full of delivery vans, and I could see several men in uniforms gathered near the entrance. Inside, the conference room was packed. Maybe 50 people total, drivers, supervisors, regional managers, and a handful of folks in military uniforms I recognized from Bill Peterson's office. At the front of the room, someone had set up a podium and a projection screen. I spotted Derek immediately. He was sitting in the back row, slumped in his chair, looking like he'd rather be getting a root canal. When he saw me walk in, his eyes went wide, and he sat up straighter. I nodded at him politely and took a seat in the front row. Marcus Webb approached me, and I could see he was nervous. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Marcus Webb. We spoke on the phone." I stood and shook his hand. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with the bearing of a man who'd seen combat. Good firm handshake, direct eye contact. Military training showed. "Mr. Webb, thank you for arranging this. Thank you for agreeing to speak. I have to say, sir, after our conversation, I did some research on your background. I had no idea. I mean, your contributions to GPS development, your service record, it's remarkable." "It was my job, Mr. Webb. Nothing remarkable about doing your job." He smiled at that. Spoken like a true soldier. "Sir, before we begin, I want you to know that Derek Martinez is facing disciplinary action for his behavior toward you. Disrespecting customers, especially veterans, is completely contrary to our company values." "What kind of disciplinary action?" "Well, normally, behavior like that would result in immediate termination, but given the educational opportunity here, and frankly, given your specific request that he attend today's seminar, I thought perhaps a final warning, mandatory retraining, and a formal apology to you in front of his peers." I considered that. "Mr. Webb, sometimes the best way to change someone's mind isn't to punish them. It's to educate them. Let's see how today goes." The seminar began with Bill Peterson providing an overview of GPS technology, how it works, why it was developed, what it means for modern life. He talked about the constellation of satellites orbiting 20,000 kilometers above Earth, each one equipped with atomic clocks precise to within nanoseconds. He explained how receivers calculate position by measuring the time it takes signals to travel from multiple satellites, how the system accounts for relativistic effects that would throw off calculations by miles if not corrected. Bill was good at this, always had been. He had a gift for explaining complex technical concepts in terms that non-engineers could understand. He showed diagrams of satellite orbits, maps of coverage areas, charts showing the incredible precision that GPS could achieve under optimal conditions. Then General Hawkins spoke about the military applications, the strategic importance of GPS, and the enormous investment the Department of Defense had made in developing and maintaining the system. She talked about how GPS had revolutionized everything from precision bombing to search and rescue operations, how it had saved countless lives and given American forces decisive advantages in conflicts around the world. Patricia had always been a compelling speaker. She had a way of making you understand not just what had been accomplished, but why it mattered. She talked about soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan who'd used GPS to navigate hostile territory, to coordinate attacks, to call in medical evacuation helicopters. She talked about pilots who'd used GPS-guided munitions to destroy enemy targets while minimizing civilian casualties. She talked about the strategic implications of having a positioning system that was accurate, reliable, and available 24 hours a day anywhere on Earth. And then it was my turn. I walked to the podium and looked out at the audience. 50 faces staring back at me, some interested, some polite, some, like Derek, looking like they wished they were anywhere else. "My name is Robert Mitchell," I began. "I'm 73 years old. I served in the United States Army Corps of Engineers for 47 years, retiring as a full colonel in 2003. During my career, I had the privilege of working on some of the most important technological developments in military history. Today, I want to talk to you about one of those developments, the global positioning system that every single person in this room uses every single day." I clicked to my first slide, a photo of the first GPS satellite launched in 1978. This is Navstar 1, the first operational GPS satellite. I was part of the team that designed its orbital mechanics, its communication systems, and its atomic clock synchronization protocols. When this satellite was launched, most of you weren't even born yet. But the work we did on this project, and the 23 satellites that followed it, created the foundation for everything your company does today. I talked for 20 minutes about the technical challenges we'd faced, the problems we'd solved, the breakthroughs that had seemed impossible until we made them happen. I showed them photos from the Nevada test range, where we'd proven that handheld GPS receivers could work under combat conditions. I talked about the first Gulf War, where GPS-guided munitions had shocked the world with their precision. I talked about the decision to make GPS available for civilian use, and how that decision had spawned entire industries that simply hadn't existed before. And then I got personal. But today, I'm not here just to talk about satellites and algorithms. I'm here to talk about respect, about the idea that every person you meet has a story, has experiences, has contributions that you might not know about the danger of making assumptions based on someone's age, their appearance, or their current circumstances. I looked directly at Derek, who was staring at the table in front of him. I remember the night we finally got satellite number 4 into stable orbit. It was December 1978, colder than hell, and I'd been awake for 36 hours straight. My team was running on coffee and determination, trying to solve a timing synchronization problem that was throwing off our positioning calculations by hundreds of meters. My daughter's birthday was the next day. She was turning 7. And I'd already missed her birthday party. The room was completely silent now. But we stayed. We worked through that night because we knew what we were building mattered. We knew that someday soldiers in combat zones would depend on this system to call in medical evacuation helicopters. We knew that search and rescue teams would use it to find people lost in the wilderness. We knew that ordinary people would use it to navigate to places they'd never been before. I clicked to another slide, a photo of me in uniform taken in 1995 during a briefing at the Pentagon. This is me briefing the Joint Chiefs of Staff on GPS accuracy improvements that would reduce targeting errors from 100 meters to less than 10 meters. The technology improvements we discussed in that room have been used in every major military operation since then. They've saved the lives of American soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. They've protected innocent civilians by making our weapons more precise. They've made possible the kind of rapid, coordinated military operations that end conflicts quickly and decisively. I paused, letting that sink in. I got my first package delivery in Vietnam 1969. I was a young engineer, 22 years old, working on communication systems in the jungle outside Da Nang. The package was from my mother, cookies and a letter telling me my father was proud of me. It came during a mortar attack. The delivery guy, a Marine corporal named Jimmy Santos from Detroit, ran through incoming fire to get mail to us. He said every package mattered because it connected us to home, reminded us what we were fighting for. I looked directly at Derek again. He was looking up now, listening. Corporal Santos didn't just toss that package at my feet and walk away. He handed it to me personally, looked me in the eye, and said, "Stay safe out there, sir." Because he understood that his job wasn't just moving boxes from one place to another. He was carrying pieces of people's hearts. I clicked again. Another photo, this one from my retirement ceremony in 2003. This is my retirement ceremony. 47 years of service to my country. 47 years of being away from my family, of missing birthdays and anniversaries and school plays because the work we were doing was too important to delay. I paused again, looking around the room. I spent Christmas Eve 1983 in a bunker in Greenland, calibrating atomic clocks that would make GPS accurate enough for civilian use. I spent my 25th wedding anniversary in a windowless room at the Pentagon, briefing the Secretary of Defense on satellite vulnerabilities. I spent my granddaughter's baptism on a test range in Nevada, watching the first handheld GPS receiver successfully guide a helicopter to a landing zone in zero visibility. The room was dead silent now. I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you this because every old person you meet has a story like this. Maybe not exactly like this, but something. Maybe they built the roads you drive on. Maybe they developed the medicines that keep you healthy. Maybe they fought in wars to protect the freedoms you enjoy. Maybe they raised the children who became the teachers, the doctors, the engineers, the leaders of today. I clicked to my final slide, a simple GPS navigation screen, the kind everyone in the room had seen thousands of times. This screen exists because of work I did before some of you were born. Every time you use it, you're benefiting from decades of effort by people like me, people who solved impossible problems, who worked with technologies that didn't exist yet, who built something from nothing because their country needed it. I stepped away from the podium. 3 weeks ago, a delivery driver told me that the world had moved on without me, that nobody cared about my war stories or whatever bullshit I'd done back in the day. He was using GPS to find my house, GPS that exists because I spent 30 years of my life in rooms like this, working on problems he couldn't even imagine. I looked directly at Derek, who was crying now. So the next time you meet someone who's older than you, someone who looks like they've seen better days, someone who doesn't fit your definition of relevant or important, remember this. Remember that you have no idea what they've done, what they've built, what they've sacrificed for the world you live in, and treat them accordingly. The applause started slowly, just a few people, then built until the entire room was on their feet. But I wasn't looking at the room. I was looking at Derek Martinez, who was sitting in the back row with tears streaming down his face. After the formal presentation ended, there was a reception, coffee and donuts, people milling around, asking questions, sharing stories. I was talking with General Hawkins when Derek approached. He stood there for a moment, clearly struggling with what to say. "Mr. Mitchell, could I talk to you for a minute?" "Of course." General Hawkins excused herself, and Derek and I found a quiet corner of the room. "Sir, I don't even know where to start. I am so sorry. I had no idea. I mean, I knew GPS was important, but I never thought about who actually built it, you know? I just thought it was always there." I nodded. "Most people do. That's not unusual. But what I said to you, how I treated you, that was inexcusable. You could have gotten me fired. You should have gotten me fired. Instead, you taught me something important." "What's that?" "That everyone has a story, that everyone matters, that just because someone doesn't look important to me doesn't mean they're not important." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "My grandfather was a mechanic, worked on cars his whole life, died when I was in high school. I used to think his job wasn't important, you know, not like being a doctor or a lawyer or something. But after today, I'm thinking about all the people who got to work safely, who got home to their families, because my grandfather fixed their cars right. I'm thinking about how many accidents he prevented, how many lives he saved just by doing his job well." "That's exactly right," I said. "Every job matters. Every person matters. Your job matters, Derek. You're not just delivering packages. You're connecting people to the things they need, the things they ordered, the gifts they're sending to people they love. That's important work. I never thought of it that way. Maybe you should." We talked for another 10 minutes. He told me about his family. His mother was a nurse. His father worked construction. He had a younger sister in college studying to be a teacher. He told me about his plans, his dreams, his hope of maybe starting his own business someday. I told him about my grandchildren, about my workshop, about the model airplanes I built in my spare time. Just two people having a conversation, finding common ground. As the reception was winding down, Marcus Webb approached us. "Mr. Mitchell, I can't thank you enough for today. This has been educational for all of us. I'm glad it was helpful." "Sir, I have a proposition for you. We'd like to hire you as a consultant, part-time, flexible schedule. Your job would be to talk to our drivers about technology, about service, about respect. Help us build a company culture that values both innovation and human dignity." I looked at Derek, who was nodding enthusiastically. "That sounds interesting, Mr. Webb. What exactly did you have in mind?" "Monthly seminars, maybe. New driver orientation, customer service training. And frankly, sir, I think our entire management team could benefit from hearing more about your experiences, your perspective on leadership and service." We worked out the details over the next few days. The pay was decent, the schedule was flexible, and the work was meaningful. But more than that, it gave me a chance to share what I'd learned over 7 decades of life, to help build bridges between generations, to remind people that respect and dignity aren't just nice ideas, they're the foundation of a civilized society. Derek became one of my most enthusiastic students. He started arriving early for seminars, asking thoughtful questions, sharing insights from his own experience. His delivery performance improved dramatically, not just with me, but with all his customers. His supervisor noticed, his customers noticed, and Derek himself noticed. He started taking pride in his work in a way he never had before. 6 months later, Derek was promoted to supervisor. A year after that, he was managing the entire regional driver training program. He called me the day he got the promotion. "Mr. Mitchell, I wanted you to know that I'm naming the training program after you, the Robert Mitchell Customer Excellence Initiative, if that's okay with you." "Derek, I'm honored, but it should be about the principles, not about me." "With respect, sir, it's about both. The principles matter, but so do the people who teach them. So do the people who live them." The training program Derek developed became a model for other regions. Customer satisfaction scores in our area improved dramatically. Complaints about package handling dropped to almost zero. More importantly, the drivers who went through Derek's program started treating their jobs differently. They understood that they weren't just moving packages. They were connecting people, facilitating commerce, making modern life possible. 2 years after that infamous package throwing incident, Derek invited me to his wedding. I sat in the front row, honorary grandfather, he called me, and watched him marry a wonderful young woman named Maria, who worked as a nurse at the VA hospital. During his speech at the reception, he talked about respect, about dignity, about the importance of treating every person you meet as if they have something valuable to offer. And he told the story of the day he met an old man who changed his life by teaching him that everyone has a story worth knowing. The ripple effects continued to spread. Maria, Derek's wife, started a volunteer program at the VA hospital where young people would spend time with elderly veterans, listening to their stories, learning about their experiences. She called it the Living History Project, and it became so popular that other hospitals started similar programs. Derek's sister, the one studying to be a teacher, wrote her master's thesis on intergenerational communication in the workplace. She used our story as a case study, showing how education and understanding could break down barriers between different age groups. Marcus Webb expanded the consultant program, bringing in other retired military personnel to speak to employees about technology, leadership, and service. Speed Logistics became known in the industry for having the best trained, most professional drivers in the business. As I write this, I'm 75 years old. Derek is now the Regional Operations Manager for Speed Logistics, overseeing driver training programs across 3 states. The Robert Mitchell Customer Excellence Initiative has trained over 2,000 drivers, and customer satisfaction scores in Derek's region are the highest in the company. But more than that, Derek has become a teacher himself. He speaks to young people about respect, about service, about the importance of understanding that every person you meet has experiences and wisdom that can enrich your life if you're smart enough to pay attention. Sometimes people ask me why I didn't just get Derek fired that first day, why I went to all the trouble of organizing seminars and writing letters and making phone calls when I could have just made a simple complaint and been done with it. The answer is simple. Punishment might have satisfied my anger, but it wouldn't have changed anything. Derek would have been fired, some other young person would have taken his place, and the cycle of disrespect would have continued. By choosing education over retribution, by choosing understanding over anger, we created something better. We created change that lasted, change that spread, change that made the world a little bit better for everyone. That's the real power of respect. It's not just about how you treat people. It's about how you help them become better versions of themselves. It's about recognizing that everyone you meet has the potential to grow, to learn, to contribute something meaningful to the world. Derek Martinez threw packages at my door because he thought I was just another irrelevant old man. Now he's teaching other young people that there's no such thing as an irrelevant old man or an irrelevant person of any age. He's helping to build a world where everyone is valued, where everyone's story matters, where everyone is treated with the dignity they deserve. And that, I think, is a pretty good return on investment for one afternoon of education. The GPS satellites I helped design are still up there, 20,000 kilometers above our heads, sending signals that help millions of people find their way every single day. But I'm most proud of the signal Derek Martinez is sending right here on Earth. That respect is always the right route to take, no matter where you're trying to go. Today, I receive my packages gently, delivered with a smile and a, "How are you doing today, Mr. Mitchell?" But more than that, the other elderly folks in my neighborhood have started asking me something that fills my heart with hope. "Robert, how do we get our respect back? How do we teach these young people that we matter too?" And I tell them Derek's story, because it proves that one conversation can change everything. One moment of understanding can transform not just one person, but ripple out to change thousands of lives. The revolution of respect starts with one package delivered right, one story told with patience, one young person who finally understands that the world they inherited was built by hands they never thought to thank. And if an old engineer like me can help start that revolution, then maybe there's hope for all of us yet.